Hi, Donna.
Hi, Al. I'm excited about this conversation. I've been having a good time talking with you about what is truth.
I'm excited about this too. Truth is a very interesting topic. Yeah, so you're going to pose a question.
Yeah, what makes you think your truth is accurate?
That's a really good question. And I think that the answer to that question varies from person to person and context to context. Although people often believe that their truth is the absolute truth and that there's no other truth that can be out there. So, kind of a fundamentalism of truthiness, as Stephen Colbert would say.
That's funny. So, I tend to be very practically oriented. So, I like to go to the truth of the matter and say, how are your feet touching the floor?
Now, that's an undisputable truth. I mean, even though everybody's going to experience that in a different way, but everybody's feet who are on the floor who are listening to this are going to have a subjective experience of that. And It's going to be their truth because it's their perception and their experience of their feet on the floor.
And they might even say, well, the way that feet rest on the floor is with the heels heavier than the toes. And that's a fact.
And they might even sense that one heel has more pressure on it than the other. That is also a fact.
They might, but they might not even notice the distinction between their two heels.
Really?
Oh, many people would I think, they just sense their feet and go, heels, they're heavier than the toes, and that must be true for everybody because that's how it is for me.
Well, I often get people into making the finer distinctions. I try to in my classes to make sure that they get a clear distinction between the right heel and the left heel because they're very different. We use them very differently.
That's true. And it's also interesting that at the end of a Feldenkrais lesson, or even sometimes just a very brief exposure to sensory and movement awareness, is that instead of having your heels heavier, you have the balls of your feet heavier, or you have more pressure on the outside edges rather than the inside edges. It's that things are continuously changing throughout a Feldenkrais awareness for movement lesson. And one of the results of that is questioning what is truth or reality because it's continuously changing.
It is. It is continuously shifting. Our attention is shifting, our perceptions are shifting, because when we do a lesson like that, we're attending to ourselves in new ways, in novel ways, doing novel movements with awareness, and it begins to change our self-image. Literally, in our motor cortex and our sensory motor cortex starts to change, and that starts to show up in the way we feel ourselves, the way the feet feel on the floor begins to change. And that's actually a shift that happens in our neurology.
Yeah, so those of you that are listening and have your feet on the floor, if it's possible, you could be standing or sitting, is just lift your right heel and drop it. And lift it and drop it. Notice your breathing. Lift it and drop it. Notice the movement above your foot. And now leave your right foot on the floor and notice the difference between your right foot and your left foot. Does one heel feel heavier or more in contact with the floor than the other one?
It does for me.
So it might not. So let's do that now with the left heel. Yep, just lift and drop and notice your breathing. Now do it faster, like a tap, 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 tap. Breathe easily. And then rest and notice your feet again. And what are you observing?
It's really interesting. I just did that. My two legs feel very different. My heels feel very, very different. And I have very nice contact with each one of them. But I describe the right one as being a little larger in its area of contact, and the left one being a little smaller and feels lighter. The right one feels a little bit heavier. What's up with that?
You know what? This is the fun of it, isn't it? Is that you keep shifting your reality, noticing different kinds of things. And now just alternate. So you lift and drop, alternate. And notice how you do the movement. Observe your breathing, and then go a little faster. Tap, 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 right, left, or left, right, whatever it is you're doing, and breathe easily. That's it. And then rest and notice your whole self. Notice your feet and notice your entire self. Now stay with the right left thing for a moment. Don't go to any other variations just yet, so that you can test that variation before you go on to another one. Because every time you add something, then you change the experiment. So first we did one, we did the other, now we alternate, and now we're just going to breathe and scan and see what state you're in. How has your state changed?
Well, I'm doing that, and I feel taller, and I feel like my gaze is lifted a little bit. So I'm looking more up, out toward the horizon. So that's an interesting shift.
That is an interesting shift. Now, I've been doing it as I've been speaking, and I feel generally just more present, a little calmer, actually. And I would say my peripheral vision has increased a little bit.
So I'd be really curious if people could pitch in right now and say what they felt. Maybe they could leave a comment. That'd be cool.
That would be.
Leave a comment on the podcast or on the website, feldenkrais4life.com. But yeah, everybody's going to have a different experience of that. So I had a really large change in terms of looking up and seeing more outward. You had a very different kind of sense of yourself. So I'd expect everybody who listened to that would have some kind of different response to it, because they have a different truth, as we're talking about, a different reality, which is really a different map of themselves in their motor cortex and their sensory motor cortex, which changed a little bit from doing this exploration.
Well, that's true. And there's so many things that could have changed. And I want to say that if you felt nothing, tell us that too. We want to know anything. You don't have to report what we might say is a positive effect. Maybe you don't like your feet feeling bigger on the floor. Maybe you like small feet. Maybe you don't feel anything. So this is an example of how quickly, for some people, things can change. So whatever fast, fixed views we have of the world, if they're questioned, and if something takes place to change one's personal, or like you said, subjective experience, or the context of the experience, then a new view can be adopted. But part of that depends on how flexible you are as a human being, or sometimes we say, how flexible is your brain, your nervous system?
And we all have the great capacity to have that flexibility, which is to learn and to make changes in our neurology, our nervous system, and to learn in that way. And there are perspectives out there that say that changing habits takes a long time. But, my experience working with people is that a change in habit, especially in movement, organization, balance, coordination, can happen really quite quickly. I'll just share a brief experience here. I'm excited about this example because it's my sister who joined my class, and she reported after a couple of months of being in my class that she was able to stand comfortably for long periods of time, go for long walks, and the pain in her lower back went away. That's a huge change in habit. And that's just going to 2 classes a week for a couple of months, not practicing every day, not making lists or memorizing or doing rote kind of exercise. So that's the way we work with habits, the way we change them. And that has a huge effect on everything else in her life, right? Now she can go for longer walks, she can cook more, everything gets easier for her.
That is huge. And the cool thing is that she didn't have to try. She just had to show up for your classes twice a week for a few months or so. And all these things are different in her experience of herself and her life. Yeah,
it becomes second nature. Changing habits really at an unconscious level that we don't have to practice or work at. It just happens and it just shows up spontaneously. And that's what Feldenkrais talked about a lot, the difference between compulsion and spontaneity. And just having that ability to respond and things change naturally and easily.
Well, another assumption that Dr. Feldenkrais had was that when you experience a higher level of functioning in yourself, you're going to gravitate toward it. So she had a taste of what feels good. And we assume, an automatic looking for that. After you sense it, you feel it, you walk around after a lesson, and you find a new way of experiencing yourself. And then your nervous system looks for that in the future. And you don't have to do it with this sense of top-down self-control.
Right. So spot on. Yeah, because our brains, our nervous systems, we want to feel good. And when we get an example of that, we want more of it. And like you said, brain starts to predict it, anticipate it, and look for it. So we start creating those experiences for ourselves.
And we want to, I think intrinsically, we want to gravitate toward pleasure. We want to experience pleasure every day. The pleasure of going for a walk, feeling good, chopping some carrots or celery at the chopping block, looking outside and seeing things growing, the greenness of the plants and the trees or the pinkness of the flowers. All of those things give us intense pleasure. But sometimes we don't notice those things. So how do we prime ourselves for pleasure, Al? How do we do that?
Well, Feldenkrais lessons are one nice way to go about it, because we are actually cultivating pleasant sensations. So when we do Feldenkrais lessons, we are moving our attention away from discomfort, away from straining and stressing, moving towards pleasure, ease, comfort, what feels good. So we're literally training our brains, training our nervous systems to move towards pleasantness. When we do more of that, then we start to perceive more pleasantness in the world.
It's so true. Last week, well, you do know this, last week I had a flu. I haven't had any kind of flu for such a long time. And I was so shocked to have the flu during COVID and not have COVID. I was tested 3 times because I actually did get a positive first test. And then I was tested twice and they were negative. But I felt pretty lousy. One of the most striking things about feeling bad was the awareness that my mind was so critical of everything. Like my poor husband, I just had to zip it and not say anything because things that ordinarily don't bother me were driving me out of my mind. And I was really aware that it was the flu. That because ordinarily, really, we do so well. We've been cooped up for a year, like everybody, mostly seeing each other, a few other people. And we've figured out how to navigate. We do everything so differently. But I just usually say, well, that's his way and this is my way. And I appreciate the fact that he's doing it. He folds towels differently. He puts the dishes away differently. You name it, it's different. But for some reason with that flu, everything that we did differently felt like the most shocking, abrasive experience. So I soon realized that I just needed to be quiet, read a book, watch TV, and wait this out, because otherwise we were going to have some major blow-ups around here.
Now that you're beyond that, how have things changed?
I look at him and I just love him and appreciate him. And, I went away for a night to my kid's house, came back. The house was really clean and he did all of that, knowing that it would make me happy when I got home. And I just feel, this feeling of loving him and cherishing him again. And he's so much less annoying today.
I think that really speaks to, how we feel inside, like what people refer to as affect, the body sensations that we have can be affected by an illness like that, by the flu or having a cold, but also affected by what we eat, what we drink. All those things can have an effect on how we feel and how we perceive the world. It's really interesting. Eating too much sugar, not too good,
Mm-hmm. Or you might feel good for a short time and then feel terrible.
That's usually the way it works.
Yeah.
Same thing with alcohol and stuff like that,
Yeah. Well, in Dr. Feldman Barrett's book, How Emotions Are Made, she talks a lot about this, and her term is notice your body budget. So before you attribute meaning that may be completely off base, check out how have you been drinking water? Have you eaten? How did you sleep last night? Have you gone for a walk lately? Have you talked to a friend recently? It's like, check all your basics first and then figure out how you're feeling about something. Because if you're off, you can make some big wrong decisions actually based on the fact that your body budget is out of kilter.
Yeah. She gives a reference in her book, and I've heard this before, about judges. Mm-hmm. They often hand down more severe sentences before lunch than they do after lunch. So they have a feeling, they're hungry. They may not know they're hungry, or they don't know that it's affecting their decision making. They just have a bad feeling, and this guy is standing in front of them. And so they hand down a harsher sentence. They have no awareness of that. But it's true. And that just shows how much something like that, hunger, being hungry or being thirsty, can affect the way we feel and the kind of decisions we make.
When you say that, I feel so bad for people that are involved with the whole legal system and waiting for other people to make decisions that are huge decisions, that are going to impact their lives. Could be more time in prison, like you're saying, more severe financial penalties for their actions. And it's not to say that there shouldn't be repercussions, but how on earth do we become aware of these differences in ourselves and act accordingly?
That's tough. That's really tough, because you've got a lot of people out there in the system who would be hard to reach and re-educate in that way.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would say my neighbors.
Yeah.
Some of my neighbors, I think, probably would think this conversation was totally crazy.
I had a thought the other day. I was reading the headlines in the news feed, and the head of the CDC said she had a feeling of doom about the pandemic. And part of me wondered, going, is she hungry? Where does this feeling of doom come from? Does this come from data, or is this just a feeling that she has because her body budget's a little bit out of balance? Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know, but that's the thought that occurred to me. It was a curiosity.
Well, maybe she had a little flu like I had last week.
It could be.
So anyway, I invite all of you that are listening today to do some experimentation with our Feldenkrais lessons, goof around with your sensations, your perceptions, and maybe be willing to change your mind, to change your perspective on things. I think it's a lot more fun every day to be willing to change perspective. How about you, Al?
I do too. And I think doing Feldenkrais lessons is probably the funnest way to go about that, because it doesn't require you to put in a lot of effort to change your habits or to change what you eat and that kind of thing. Those can be kind of emergent from doing Feldenkrais lessons, because when you start doing lessons and you start feeling better and you start moving better, your awareness of yourself improves. You start to become more conscious, more aware of your body budget, really, because you start to notice these differences when you eat something and you don't feel so well, or you notice when you're thirsty or when you're hungry. You start to make these kinds of differentiations in your sensations. Because one of the things we learn in these lessons, not explicitly, but implicitly, by learning to discern and have more granularity in our sensing of ourselves. So we start to make more refined distinctions. When that happens, then you start to be able to make better decisions about what makes you feel good. And of course, a Feldenkrais lesson, even just based on my example earlier, a couple of times a week, or even once a week, can make a big difference in your life. On a daily basis, like I do, or I think you probably do them almost on a daily basis too, it has a huge impact on your overall sense of self and your well-being.
One of the cool things about doing the Feldenkrais method, doing a lesson every day or every other day, whatever it is you choose to do, is you can do it when you're feeling really lazy. So it could be your afternoon break. So during that time that you don't want to do anything else, And before you take another cup of coffee, if you're going to do that, lie on the floor, roll around, do a lesson for 20 minutes to a half an hour, and it's going to reset you so that you actually feel more motivated and more creative once again. So you kind of refresh your nervous system, your mind, your motivation with a Feldenkrais lesson. So you don't have to use prime time when you want to be doing other things that are more active. You can be really lazy and reorganize yourself and enjoy yourself.
How awesome is that? Now, where are people going to find these lessons that they can do in the afternoon so easily?
Well, they can go to your website, achievingexcellence.com, or mine, donnaray.com. And we're starting to accumulate some workshops that we've taught. Our Unzooming workshop is very good for that.
Yeah, and that's available at feldenkrais4life.com. And you may be there right now listening to this podcast. If so, head over to the workshop in the product section.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we have lots of material for you, and listen to our other podcasts and communicate with us at feldenkrais4life.com. Thank you for listening.
Yep. If you like this, rate it, give us 5 stars, leave a comment. Love to hear from you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.